Have you ever noticed how when you really start digging deep into the unexplained, all those UFO and alien encounter stories,
Uh-huh.
certain weird little details just keep popping up?
Right.
Like they're small things you might not think too much about on their own.
Yeah.
But when you see them over and over again in totally different stories, you can't help but wonder if there's something more to it.
Absolutely.
And today, we're going to dive headfirst into one of those persistent little details. And I got to say, it's a pretty smelly one.
Oh, really?
We're talking about unusual odors that people often report right alongside UFO sightings and alleged alien encounters.
Interesting.
So we've been going through a bunch of firsthand accounts shared on this YouTube channel called Eyes on Cinema.
Okay.
And some of these stories are really something else.
I did
But
it.
really jumps out at you is just how often these smelly experiences come up.
Hmm.
It's not like people just say something smelled a bit off.
Right.
They actually describe very specific kinds of smells. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the two main types of smells that keep cropping up.
All right.
One is sulfur-like.
Okay, like rotten eggs.
Exactly. And the other is ammonia-like.
Oh, interesting. So we're going to sniff out what these sensory details might mean.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We're going to see if these smells could be giving us clues about what's really going on in these encounters.
I'm ready. Let's get sniffing.
Yeah. All right, let's start by taking a deep breath and diving into the sulfurous side of things.
Okay.
One story that really stuck with me was the account of Nurse Judy near Roswell back in 1947.
Oh, yeah, the Roswell incident.
Right after the supposed crash, Judy and two doctors were reportedly examining what they described as foreign bodies.
Wow.
And it wasn't just a sight of what Judy saw that was shocking.
I can imagine.
She was apparently hit by this absolutely horrible smell.
Oh, no.
And get this, it wasn't just unpleasant. The account says that Judy and both doctors actually got sick from the stench while they were examining these beings.
Really? That's intense. So right off the bat, we're seeing a pattern here.
Right.
It's not just fleeting glimpses. People are having a full-on sensory experience.
Yeah.
And in this early account, the intensity of the smell even suggests that there might be something harmful present.
It makes you think, right?
Absolutely. It raises a big question. Are these just subjective reactions, or do these odors point to something real, something tangible in these encounters?
It's a question worth exploring, for sure.
Yeah.
The fact that they got physically ill from the smell is definitely a detail that sticks with you.
Definitely. It suggests that the smell wasn't just offensive. It might have actually been toxic or at least irritating.
Right. It wasn't just stinky. It was something that could actually make you sick.
Yeah. And then there's the description of the bodies themselves, about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, with tan gray skin, large eyes.
Yeah.
And they kind of resembled undeveloped children with this shuffling movement.
Right.
That's another detail that pops up in a few of these stories, which we'll get into later.
We will.
But for now, let's stick with the smell. That immediate visceral reaction that multiple people reported, that's something we should definitely keep in mind.
It really emphasizes the sensory aspect of these encounters.
Yeah.
It wasn't just something they saw. It was something they smelled, and it was something that affected them physically.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that in the same video, there's another account this time from someone who remembers being lifted into a blue-white light.
Oh, wow.
And they encountered beings with very similar physical characteristics.
You're kidding?
Again, about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, brown tan skin, large oval heads, black eyes, long skinny arms, and looking like undeveloped children.
So similar to what Judy described.
Exactly. And this person also mentioned a funny smell while they were around these beings.
Interesting. Funny is obviously not as strong a word as horrible,
True.
but it still suggests an unusual smell.
It does. The key takeaway here is that something is consistently present in the air during these encounters. Whether it's repulsive or just weird, this sensory detail makes you think that there's something different, something foreign to what the witness normally experiences.
It's like a hint that they've stepped into an environment or maybe even encountered a biological presence that's completely alien to them.
Exactly. It's like a little olfactory clue that something's not quite right.
Now let's move on to a really well-known case, the 1952 Flatwoods Monster incident.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that one. What was the smell like in that case?
That's what makes this one so interesting.
Okay.
It wasn't the typical rotten egg smell we usually think of with sulfur.
Right.
Like hydrogen sulfide from volcanoes or decaying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
These young people who were checking out this landed light on a hilltop,
Yeah.
they were hit by this terrible smell that they specifically compared to grease hitting hot metal.
Grease hitting hot metal, that's a pretty vivid description. And it's definitely different from rotten eggs.
It is. It's a very distinct and kind of industrial smell for you to consider.
It makes you wonder what could have caused that kind of odor.
And it gets even weirder. Days later, after it had rained, and you'd think the area would be washed clean, one of the investigators said there was still this ghastly smell of hot, molten metal at the site.
Wow. It lingered for days. That's strange.
And to add to that, one of the young men actually fainted during the initial encounter.
Oh, no.
And the account suggests that it might have been because of some kind of gas.
So it wasn't just a bad smell. There might have been something in the air that actually affected him physically.
Right. That fainting really suggests there was something more than just an unpleasant odor going on.
Absolutely. It points to the possibility of a gaseous substance, something beyond just a bad smell.
Exactly. And the fact that the smell lingered even after rain, it makes you think of a residue or some kind of ongoing chemical reaction.
Right. It wasn't just something that dissipated quickly.
So even within this category of sulfur-like smells, there's a lot of variation.
Yeah.
It seems like we might be dealing with more than just one source or type of phenomenon.
That's a really important point to consider. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Definitely. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit, but stick with the sulfur theme for now.
Okay.
Let's talk about Linda Moulton Howe.
Oh, I've heard of her. She's a respected journalist who's done a lot of research on UFOs and alien encounters.
Exactly. She reported smelling burning sulfur and tar in connection with some unusual aerial phenomena.
Wow. That's a pretty specific combination of smells.
It is. And what's really interesting here is that she claims a being followed her into her van.
Into her van.
Yeah, and this being also had that same burning sulfur smell.
So the smell is directly linked to the entity itself.
Right. It's not just a byproduct of a craft or something. It seems to be coming from the being itself.
That's a significant detail. It strengthens the possibility that the odor is somehow connected to the biology or some other attribute of the being.
It really makes you wonder what these beings are made of or what kind of processes are happening within them to produce that kind of smell.
Definitely. It's a fascinating clue.
Now, there's another case from 1973 involving a guy named Steven Peski.
Okay. What happened to him?
He encountered these tall, hairy beings with these really intense greenish-yellow eyes.
Oh, wow.
And he said there was a smell like burning rubber around them.
Burning rubber. That's interesting.
It is. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. After the encounter, Peski reportedly became aggressive.
Aggressive, really?
Yeah, and other people who were around him noticed a really nauseating sulfur-like odor.
So another sulfur smell, but this time it started with burning rubber and then shifted to something more like rotten eggs.
Right. It makes you wonder if the initial burning rubber smell was just a variation of a sulfurous odor or if it was something else entirely.
And the fact that other people smelled the sulfur after Peski's reaction is also pretty strange.
It is. It makes you think maybe the encounter somehow transferred the odor to the environment or even onto Peski himself.
Yeah, like he was somehow marked by the encounter.
Exactly. Okay, so now let's talk about John Mahalik's story. This one's particularly unsettling.
You're right. I'm all ears.
Mahalik encountered a hot, glowing craft.
Hot, glowing. That sounds intense.
It was. And afterwards, he started having all these health problems. Nausea, weight loss, couldn't keep any food down.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
It was. But what's relevant to our discussion here is that his son said there was this awful smell, like rotten eggs coming from Mahalik's body after the encounter.
Coming from his body? That's really strange.
It is. Even the Mayo Clinic apparently suggested that there might have been a toxin in his system.
Wow. So not only was there a sulfur smell, but there's also a possibility of actual poisoning.
Right. It's a pretty disturbing connection between a close encounter and a really serious physical reaction.
Definitely Mahalik's case really strengthens the argument that these encounters can have real physical consequences.
Right. It's not just psychological trauma.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be something physical happening as well.
Yeah. And the fact that the craft was described as pink hot,
Uh-huh.
that suggests some kind of unusual energy or material properties.
Right.
Which could maybe explain the odor or the toxin?
It's a possibility worth considering for sure.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's move on to the other major smell category we've been seeing, ammonia.
Okay, I'm curious about this one. It's not as commonly associated with UFO encounters as sulfur.
Right. The case from Virginia, Brazil involving two sisters is a good example here.
Tell me more.
They said they smelled a strong ammonia smell near a creature with these big glowing red eyes.
Glowing red eyes. Sounds creepy.
It was. And it wasn't just the sisters. Their mom also smelled the ammonia and even saw some strange tracks.
So multiple witnesses smelling the same thing, that adds a lot of credibility to the account.
Definitely. It wasn't just the kids being scared and imagining things. An adult who wasn't initially focused on the creature also smelled the same sharp ammonia odor.
Right. And the unexplained tracks add another layer of evidence that something unusual was going on.
Exactly. It all ties together. But the ammonia smell in this case gets even more interesting.
Really? How so?
Military police at Humanitas Hospital where an alleged captured creature was taken.
They had a captured creature?
That's what the accounts say. Anyway, the military police also reported this horrible smell that they said burned their noses.
Oh, wow.
They were wearing masks because the smell was so bad.
That's intense.
And one of the military police specifically said it was ammonia.
So you have multiple trained observers, the military police and medical personnel, independently confirming this strong ammonia smell.
Right, and these are people who are likely used to dealing with all sorts of smells in their work.
That's true. It's not like they're easily fazed by a little odor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is perhaps the most compelling evidence we have that ammonia is somehow connected to these events.
Absolutely. The fact that so many people identified the smell as ammonia specifically is really significant. It's not just a vague description of a bad smell.
Right, it's a specific chemical compound with a very distinct odor.
Exactly. And the fact that they were wearing masks, it really highlights how intense and potentially harmful the smell was.
It wasn't just unpleasant. It was something they felt they needed to protect themselves from.
Right. So we're seeing these two distinct categories emerge. Sulfur-like odors in different forms, rotten eggs, burning rubber grease, hitting hot metal, often associated with sightings and sometimes even illness.
And then you have these very specific and corroborated reports of a strong ammonia smell.
In the Brazil case.
Right, links to the creature and its alleged capture.
It's pretty fascinating how these different smells seem to be connected to different types of encounters or beings.
It really is. It makes you wonder if the different sulfur-like smells are caused by different processes or substances.
Right. Maybe it's different chemical reactions or even biological processes if we're talking about unknown life forms.
And then you have ammonia, which is a known chemical compound with a very distinct smell.
The fact that it was so clearly identified by multiple people really makes you think.
Definitely. It's worth noting, though, that while sulfur and ammonia are the most common smells reported in these accounts, there are other unusual descriptions, too.
Like what?
A moldy refrigerator, a chemical pesticide, even rotting vegetation.
That's interesting. It suggests that the range of smells associated with these phenomena might be pretty diverse.
Right. It's not just one or two specific odors.
Yeah.
It's a whole spectrum of smells, which implies that maybe we're not dealing with just one uniform phenomenon.
Right. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
It does. These other descriptions really make you think.
Yeah. For example, that moldy refrigerator smell, it could suggest the presence of biological matter that's decomposing.
That's true. And then the chemical pesticide odor.
Right.
It makes you wonder if it's actually a substance related to human technology or if it's just a misinterpretation of some unknown chemical. It could be something totally different, too.
Right. There are so many possibilities. These variations really highlight the fact that the olfactory side of these encounters is multifaceted.
Now, of course, we have to acknowledge that our sense of smell is very subjective.
Oh, absolutely.
Our perception of odors can be influenced by all sorts of things, especially our emotional state.
Right.
Like if you're feeling scared or stressed in an unusual situation.
It could definitely affect how you perceive smells.
Exactly. It would be easy to dismiss these reports as just products of heightened anxiety.
Right. People imagining things because they're in a frightening situation.
But the thing is, certain smell descriptions keep popping up in multiple independent accounts.
Yeah.
Sometimes even from people you think are pretty credible, like law enforcement officers or medical professionals.
That's true.
So while we have to consider the possibility that psychological factors are playing a role, the consistency of these reports is something we can't just ignore.
It's one thing if one person says they smelled something weird because they were scared.
Right.
But when multiple people in the same location report the same distinct and unusual odor,
Yeah.
that's a different story.
It really makes you think. And remember all those cases we talked about where people experienced physical effects alongside the sulfur smell?
Right, like Judy and the doctors getting sick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Could that be a stronger indication of a real chemical irritant rather than just a psychological reaction?
It's a really good question. It makes you wonder if there's more to these smells than just imagination.
We're not saying these smells are definitive proof of anything.
Of course not.
But the fact that they keep appearing in these stories definitely adds another layer to the mystery.
It suggests that there might be something tangible behind these reports.
Right. It's not just subjective experience.
Exactly.
Oh.
And here's what's really fascinating.
What's that?
Based on these firsthand accounts alone, we don't have any real scientific analysis of these smells.
We don't know what they're made of or where they're coming from.
Exactly. We're relying on observations and reports from people who experience something unusual.
It makes it hard to draw firm conclusions.
It does. But the consistency of the reports themselves is something you can't just brush aside.
It's a pattern that demands attention.
Absolutely.
So to recap, we have these recurring reports of sulfur-like smells, often associated with sightings of strange beings and craft, and sometimes even leading to physical illness. And then we have those very specific and corroborated reports of a strong ammonia smell in the Brazil case.
Linked to the creature and its alleged capture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These smell details, even though they're often overlooked,
Yeah.
they add a whole other dimension to the strangeness of these encounters.
It's not just what people saw or what they described.
Right.
There's this sensory element that hints at possible chemical or biological aspects of these phenomena.
It's like these smells are giving us a glimpse into something we don't fully understand yet.
It's a reminder that there's more to these encounters than meets the eye, or in this case, the nose.
Exactly. So here's a final thought for you to ponder.
Okay.
Given how consistently these unusual smells are reported across different cases,
Yeah.
what could be causing them?
That's the million-dollar question.
Is it something physical?
Like the propulsion systems of UFOs, or maybe even the biological processes of alien life forms.
Right. Or could it be that people are misinterpreting natural odors under these really strange and stressful circumstances?
That's possible, too.
Or maybe it's something else entirely, something we haven't even thought of yet.
That's the thing about the unexplained. There's always the possibility of the unknown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to keep exploring these fascinating accounts and see what conclusions you come to.
It's a mystery that's worth sniffing out.
It certainly is.